Ethan never imagined that something as simple as a view could mean so much. When he first moved into the quiet suburban neighborhood, his little house had one standout feature: a sprawling backyard that dropped away into a rolling valley, painted with wildflowers and kissed by golden sunlight each morning. It was his sanctuary, the one piece of peace he held on to after years of restless city living. Every dawn, he would stand on his deck, coffee cup in hand, watching the sunrise blaze across the horizon like a promise that today might be better than yesterday. That morning, however, something was different. The soft hum of lawn sprinklers and birdsong was drowned out by a strange, relentless clatter. Ethan rubbed his eyes, stepping out onto the deck just in time to catch a flash of orange safety vests and the harsh glare of floodlights behind his fence. A group of men moved purposefully, their machines whirring and grinding, cutting into the earth where wild grass and wildflowers had grown for decades. Confusion churned into alarm. Ethan hurried down the steps and pressed his ear to the fence. Voices, shouts. He could barely make out the words. "Utility project," someone muttered. "Community improvement," said another. But there had been no notice, no letter, no warning of any kind. He stormed through the front door, grabbing his phone to call the HOA office. No answer. He left a message demanding an explanation. His hands trembled. Something was wrong, and the unease settled deep in his chest like a stone. Over the next few days, Ethan tried to find answers. The HOA meetings he attended grew colder still when he brought up the construction behind his home. The board members exchanged glances, then smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Their words dripped with thinly veiled condescension. "Mr. Clark, sometimes we have to make tough decisions for the good of the neighborhood," the HOA president, Mr. Halverson, said one evening, his tone almost mocking. "Not everything can be tailored for one homeowner's whim." Ethan swallowed his anger. "You're building something that blocks my entire view," he said quietly. "My home was purchased because of that view. It's everything to me." A few board members chuckled. "Views come and go, Ethan. That's life," one sneered. The room felt like a trap. Ethan's voice faltered, but his resolve hardened. This was no accident. The HOA wasn't just ignoring him. They were deliberately dismissing his concerns and, worse, enjoying the power they wielded over his life. One evening, Ethan stood on his deck after sunset, staring at the looming shadow of the new structure, an ugly, towering metal tower that blotted out the lower half of the valley. His sanctuary was gone, replaced by cold steel and glare. A strange chill ran through him as he thought about the people behind this. Those who held the reins of the community like puppet masters, pulling strings with amusement. And worse, those who laughed at his discomfort, treating him like a joke. The neighbors' windows glowed warmly across the street, but Ethan felt isolated, like an island cut off from the shore. He wondered how many of them truly noticed or cared what the HOA had done to him. That night, sleep evaded him. His mind replayed every moment, the mocking smiles, the curt dismissals, the sudden loud noise invading his peace. And beneath it all, a seed of something new took root inside him, a fierce determination. If they thought he would simply accept it, they were wrong. Because this view was more than just scenery. It was his connection to hope, to calm, to a life he'd fought hard to build. And if they wanted to take that away, he'd find a way to fight back. Ethan's days became a restless blur, his thoughts consumed by the growing shadow behind his backyard fence. Each morning, he stepped outside with a tightening knot in his stomach. The tower loomed taller, its steel ribs catching the light like a monstrous skeleton scraping the sky. But what troubled him most was not the metal monstrosity. It was the chilling silence from his neighbors. Word had spread that the HOA had held a meeting about the project, but Ethan wasn't invited. A seed of suspicion bloomed inside him. How could a community association make decisions so impactful in secret? Determined to find out, Ethan decided to do what no homeowner dared. He would sneak into their next meeting. Late that night, he parked his car a few blocks away and crept through the shadowed streets toward the community clubhouse. The building was dark, but through a sliver of the cracked door, he caught the faint murmur of voices. His heart hammered as he crouched down and pressed his ear to the wood. Inside, the voices were low but sharp. He could make out the words Clark and liability, and worse, laughter, harsh, mocking laughter. A voice he recognized immediately. Mr. Halverson, the HOA president. "That man really thinks his view matters," Halverson said with a snide chuckle. "Like he's some kind of special snowflake." Another voice joined in, colder and more calculating. "He's a nuisance. We can't let him set a precedent. If he complains, others might follow." Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about one view, it was about control. The HOA was wielding power like a weapon, and he was the target. Suddenly, the clubhouse door creaked open a little wider. Ethan froze. The hallway was empty. Heart pounding, he slipped back into the night, the voices echoing in his mind. He had glimpsed the truth. And it was worse than he imagined. The next day, Ethan confronted his neighbors cautiously, asking if they'd heard anything about the meeting. Most shook their heads, avoiding eye contact. One older woman muttered, "They do what they want. We're just along for the ride." Ethan realized how isolated the community really was. The HOA operated in shadows, silencing dissent with quiet, threats, and veiled jokes. The mocking tone was no accident. It was a message to him and anyone else who might resist. Back at home, the tower's shadow stretched across his lawn like a dark promise. Ethan's anger burned hotter than ever. He began to imagine ways to fight back, ways to reclaim what had been taken from him, not with noise or protests, but something quieter, something growing. Late that evening, Ethan scrolled through online forums, searching for any precedent, any loophole, any strategy to fight a powerful HOA. That's when he stumbled upon a thread about landscaping battles, fast-growing trees, dense hedges, natural walls. A plan began to form in his mind, fragile but fierce. He glanced out the window at the steel tower, then at the quiet, empty valley beyond it. A shadow of a smile touched his lips. If the HOA wanted a game of power, he was ready to play. And he would do it on his own terms, quietly, steadily, invisibly. But as he closed his laptop, a sudden noise from outside made him freeze, a soft rustling by the fence. Ethan peered into the darkness, heart pounding. Nothing there, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting. The war over the view had just begun. The next morning, Ethan's mailbox held an unexpected delivery, a crisp, glossy copy of the latest HOA newsletter. The cover featured a picture of the neighborhood's new improvements, but his eyes immediately locked onto the community spotlight page inside. There it was, his face, a candid photo taken at the last meeting, paired with a headline dripping with sarcasm. "The man who lost his view in his mind." Ethan's stomach twisted. The accompanying article mocked his complaints, painting him as a paranoid troublemaker obsessed with a lost view. "We all love a good view," it read, "but some just can't accept change." The tone was cruel, dismissive, an unmistakable public shaming. The newsletter had been slipped under every door in the neighborhood, spreading the humiliation like wildfire. As Ethan stepped outside, the weight of every neighbor's eyes seemed to press down on him. Whispers followed him down the street. Some were sympathetic, but most were tinged with judgment or worse, amusement. At the local coffee shop, Ethan overheard a group of neighbors chuckling. "Did you see the newsletter? Clark's losing it over his view." one said loudly. Ethan's fists clenched, but he held his tongue. The seeds of doubt and isolation were beginning to take root. Back home, Ethan paced his backyard, staring up at the towering metal structure that now blocked the horizon. It wasn't just the view. It was the message. The HOA didn't just want to take his peace. They wanted to break him. That evening, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find his neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, an elderly woman who rarely spoke, but always observed quietly. "I'm sorry about the newsletter," she said softly. "They're meaner than they look on those boards, but you're not alone. A few of us think they've gone too far." Ethan felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deeper worry. If even neighbors were afraid to openly support him, how deep did the HOA's influence run? Determined not to be defeated, Ethan sat down with a notebook, jotting down every insult, every slight, every small victory and loss. The humiliation fueled a slow-burning fire inside him, a promise that he wouldn't be the neighborhood's punchline forever. As night fell, he stepped onto his deck and looked again at the creeping shadow cast by the tower. His eyes shifted to the fence line where a few saplings had started to sprout, small, almost insignificant, but growing. A plan was taking root. Not just any plan, but one that would turn the tables in a way no one saw coming. If the HOA thought they could mock and control him, they had another thing coming. The next morning, Ethan drove to a little-known nursery on the edge of town, seeking something special, something fast-growing and fierce. The old owner watched Ethan with a knowing smile. "Looking to make a statement?" the man asked. Ethan nodded, his jaw set. "I want to grow a wall they can't ignore." The owner's eyes twinkled with a secret. "You've got the right idea, but be careful. The trees you plant can do more than just block a view." Ethan left the nursery with a car full of young evergreens, dense, tall, and hungry to grow. Back home, he knelt in the dirt and planted the first of his green soldiers. The soil was cold, the night silent except for the whisper of leaves in the wind. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew this was just the beginning. As he stood, a shadow flickered across his window. He turned sharply, heart pounding, but saw only darkness. The neighborhood was watching, and so was the HOA. The early morning fog clung to the ground as Ethan approached the small nursery on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place hidden from most eyes, a tangled maze of trees and plants, overgrown paths, and the faint scent of earth and moss. The air was thick with something almost electric, as if nature itself was waiting for something to happen. Behind the counter stood an older man with weathered hands and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When Ethan explained his mission, to grow a living wall tall and dense enough to shield his backyard from the eyes and control of the HOA, the man smiled, but not warmly. "You're planting more than trees, friend," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. "These aren't just any evergreens. They grow fast, stubborn as a mule and thick as a fortress." Ethan nodded, swallowing the slight unease creeping up his spine. "That's exactly what I need." The man reached under the counter and pulled out several pots of young leyland cypress saplings. Their needles were vibrant, a dark green so rich it seemed unnatural in the dim light. "Take care of these," the man said, "and they'll give you shade you didn't bargain for." Ethan loaded the saplings into his car, the weight of possibility settling on his shoulders. As he drove home, his mind raced through plans. Rows of thick trees, a wall of green that no steel tower could penetrate. That evening, he dug deep holes along the fence line, each one demanding more effort than he expected. His muscles ached, sweat beaded on his forehead, but every sapling he planted felt like a tiny act of rebellion. With each tree, he planted more than roots. He planted his hope and quiet vengeance. Neighbors glanced over their fences, some with curiosity, others with disapproval. Ethan ignored them. This was his fight now, and he would see it through. Night fell, and the air cooled. Ethan sat on his porch, watching the small trees sway in the breeze like sentinels standing guard. He imagined the dense green wall they would become, towering and impenetrable, slowly swallowing the steel tower's shadow. But as he looked closer, he noticed something odd. A faint glow on one of the saplings, like a pulse of light flickering, just beneath the surface. He blinked and rubbed his eyes. The glow vanished. A chill ran down his spine. For a moment, the trees seemed almost alive, watching, waiting. The next morning brought a rude awakening. One of the saplings had been snapped off near the base. Ethan's heart sank. Whoever wanted to stop him was already watching and willing to act. He scanned the neighborhood but saw no one suspicious. The few neighbors who noticed the broken tree offered nervous smiles and quickly looked away. Ethan's mind churned. This wasn't just a battle for a view anymore. It was a war of wills. He doubled his efforts, planting more saplings farther along the fence line, mixing in thorny shrubs to discourage any closer interference. He stayed up late researching the growth patterns of the leyland cypress, learning how to nurture them into a dense, unyielding barrier. As the weeks passed, the saplings grew faster than expected, their branches thickening, needles brushing against each other in a silent, leafy conspiracy. The wall was rising, slow and steady, unnoticed by most but impossible to ignore soon. One afternoon, Ethan found a small note slipped under his door, a crude drawing of a tree crossed out with red ink and the words, "Cut it down, or else." The threat only steeled his resolve. He clenched his fists and stared out at the growing green wall. The battle lines had been drawn and he was ready to hold his ground. But deep down, a nagging question lingered. How far was the HOA willing to go? And what price would Ethan pay to win? Ethan's days had become a blur of work and worry. Every morning, he checked the young trees with a mix of hope and anxiety, noting their steady growth like the slow heartbeat of his rebellion. The once sparse saplings now stretched upward, their branches intertwining, thickening into a natural wall that promised to reclaim his stolen view. But the war was far from over. One evening, as dusk draped the neighborhood in soft purples and blues, Ethan heard a faint rustling near the fence. At first he thought it was the wind, but then a low snap, like a branch breaking, made his heart leap. Grabbing a flashlight, Ethan stepped cautiously into the backyard. His beam cut through the darkness, catching flickers of movement. Shadowy shapes slipped between the trees, quick and silent. Someone was there. "Who's there?" Ethan called, voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding in his chest. Silence answered. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed behind him. Ethan whirled around just in time to see one of his young saplings topple over, hacked at the base with a small hatchet. A chill shot through him. This wasn't random vandalism. It was targeted, deliberate, and the message was clear. Back off. Ethan's mind raced. Who was behind this? The HOA? Some hired enforcer? Or was it worse? Neighbors turned against him in silent complicity. The following days brought more signs of sabotage. Saplings uprooted, branches shredded, even a splash of bright red paint. On the fence spelling, "Give up." But Ethan refused to cower. He installed motion-activated lights and a security camera, hoping to catch the culprit in the act. Yet every night the disturbances continued, always under the cover of darkness. One late night, as Ethan reviewed the security footage, his eyes widened. A figure in a dark hoodie moved along the fence, swinging a machete with brutal efficiency, slicing through branches and trunks like they were paper. The figure paused suddenly, glancing directly at the camera, as if daring Ethan to do something. A slow, cold fury boiled inside him, but amidst the chaos, Ethan found an unlikely ally. Mrs. Delaney, the quiet neighbor who had once offered a sympathetic word, knocked on his door one evening, clutching a small envelope. "I can't stand by and watch them bully you," she whispered. This might help. Inside was a stack of old documents, emails, letters, and minutes from past HOA meetings, many stamped confidential. She explained she'd collected the evidence over months, quietly documenting the board's underhanded tactics. Ethan spent sleepless nights poring over the files, discovering a pattern of manipulation, intimidation, and outright lies. The HOA wasn't just petty, they were corrupt. Worse, their reach extended far beyond the neighborhood. Local officials and even some law enforcement seemed entangled in their web. The realization hit Ethan hard. This wasn't just a fight for a view, it was a fight for justice. But even armed with evidence, the threat was clear. The HOA would stop at nothing to maintain control. One night, as Ethan secured the door, a faint noise caught his ear, footsteps crunching gravel outside. He peered through the window, heart pounding. A car idled across the street, its headlights flicking off and on, casting eerie shadows. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the car sped away, leaving Ethan with a lingering sense of menace. He knew. This war was far from over, and the next move might be the most dangerous yet. The night after the car sped away, Ethan barely slept. Every creak of the house and whisper of the wind felt like a threat. The shadows outside seemed to watch and wait. He realized that the fight for his view had transformed into a battle for his safety and sanity. Despite the fear, Ethan pressed forward, determined to protect the young trees that represented more than just privacy. They were his stand against a ruthless HOA. Early the next morning, Ethan received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her mid-30s stood on his porch, a folder clutched tightly in her hands. She introduced herself as Claire, a former board member of the HOA who had resigned after growing tired of the board's dirty tactics. "I've been watching what's happening," she said quietly. "I couldn't stay silent anymore. You're not alone in this." Claire handed him the folder. Inside were documents, photos, and even recordings she had secretly collected over the years. Proof of the HOA's underhanded dealings, bribery, and intimidation tactics that went beyond Ethan's worst fears. Ethan's jaw tightened. This was the ammunition he needed to fight back legally, but Claire warned him, her voice low and urgent. "They know who you are now. They're desperate. You have to be careful." That night, Ethan and Claire pored over the evidence. Every document, every recording was a nail in the HOA's coffin. Yet they knew that exposing corruption wouldn't be easy. The HOA had deep roots in the local government and police force. Whistleblowers were often silenced, threatened, or worse. Still, hope flickered. If they could bring this to light, maybe the neighborhood could be freed from the shadow of fear. But as Ethan settled into a restless sleep, an ominous sound shattered the night, glass breaking downstairs. Heart racing, he grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs, only to find his living room window shattered, shards glittering on the floor. There was no sign of the intruder, only a note taped to the broken glass, smeared with dirt. "Stop digging, or face the consequences." Ethan's hands trembled, but his resolve hardened. The HOA's threats were escalating. This was no longer just about trees or views. It was about power and control. Determined to protect his home and his cause, Ethan called Claire the next morning. "We need to go public," he said firmly. "The community deserves to know." Claire nodded. "I have contacts in the local press. If we tell them everything, maybe we can break through the silence." But before they could take action, another surprise awaited. A group of neighbors, previously silent, knocked on Ethan's door. They carried signs of support and stories of their own experiences with the HOA's heavy-handed rule. "We've been afraid to speak," one woman said, "but we see what you're doing, and we want to help." Ethan's heart swelled. The silent majority was waking up. Together, they planned a community meeting, a chance to air grievances, share evidence, and demand change. But the night before the meeting, as Ethan checked on the growing trees, he noticed something strange. The leyland cypresses were glowing faintly in the moonlight, their green needles shimmering with an unnatural light. The glow pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. Ethan blinked, questioning his own eyes. Was this a trick of the light? Or something more? He felt a shiver run through him, a mixture of awe and unease. As he stood there, the trees seemed to whisper in the wind, as if alive, watching, ready. The battle lines had been drawn not just in the community, but in the very earth beneath his feet. The community meeting was set for Friday evening, and the anticipation was palpable. Ethan felt a mixture of hope and nervous tension as neighbors trickled into the local community hall, faces cautious but curious, their voices a low murmur of tentative solidarity. Claire stood beside him, her presence a steady reassurance. They had prepared meticulously, compiling evidence, testimonies, and plans for legal action. This was their moment to turn the tide. But even as the hall filled, Ethan's thoughts drifted back to the glowing trees in his backyard. The strange pulse of light that night had unsettled him deeply. He tried to brush it off as imagination. After all, the stress could play tricks on anyone. Still, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at work. The meeting began with quiet introductions, then shifted quickly to heated conversations. Neighbors shared stories of intimidation, unfair fines, and the cold iron grip of the HOA board. When Ethan stepped up to speak, the room fell silent. He laid out the evidence, the emails, the secret recordings, the threats, the broken trees. The weight of truth hung heavy in the air. Just as the meeting reached a crescendo of outrage and calls for action, a sudden flicker of lights plunged the hall into darkness. A collective gasp filled the room, followed by whispers of confusion. Seconds later, the emergency lights kicked in, revealing the tense faces of the attendees. Ethan's heart pounded. Was this another intimidation tactic? The meeting resumed, but the shadow of fear lingered. Outside, the night was thick and silent. Afterward, as Ethan drove home, a dense fog rolled in, wrapping the neighborhood in a ghostly shroud. He pulled into his driveway and paused. The backyard trees glowed again, more intensely this time, their needles shimmering with a light that seemed almost alive. Ethan stepped closer, a mix of awe and fear gripping him. Suddenly, the ground trembled faintly beneath his feet. The trees swayed as if breathing, their branches whispering in the night breeze. A voice, soft, distant, yet unmistakably human, seemed to ripple through the leaves. "You fight for justice," it said, barely audible. Ethan blinked, unsure if exhaustion was conjuring hallucinations. Then the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Stand strong. We are with you." His skin prickled. The trees weren't just plants. They were sentient, somehow connected to his fight. A surge of determination flooded Ethan's veins. The next day, he shared the experience with Claire, who listened intently. Her brow furrowed. "Whether it's your imagination or something more," she said, "use that strength. The fight isn't just about trees or views, it's about reclaiming your life." But as the days passed, strange incidents multiplied. Security cameras captured unexplained shadows moving through the yard at night. Neighbors reported odd sounds, soft murmurs and rustling when no one should be there. The HOA's tactics grew more desperate. Notices appeared threatening lawsuits for property damage caused by the growing trees. Mysterious figures were seen lurking near Ethan's property, watching and waiting. Then came the breaking point. One morning, Ethan awoke to find the steel tower, the source of his original grievance, had been vandalized overnight. Its metal beams were slashed, wires cut, and a banner hung from its highest point reading, "Nature will reclaim all." The message was clear and chilling. Was it a warning or a promise? Ethan realized the battle had shifted from the boardroom and courtroom to something primal, elemental. The trees were no longer just protection. They were a force awakening in his corner. As the sun set behind the horizon, Ethan stood before his growing wall of green, feeling the pulse of the neighborhood's hopes, fears, and defiance vibrating through every leaf. The final confrontation was near, and neither side would back down. The morning after the vandalism, the neighborhood buzzed with tension. Ethan knew the HOA wouldn't rest. They were cornered and dangerous. But the strange power he sensed in his trees filled him with an unexpected calm. Something ancient and fierce had awakened in his backyard, and it was ready to fight alongside him. The community meeting had galvanized support, and more neighbors began speaking out, emboldened by Ethan's courage and Claire's evidence. The HOA's grip was loosening, but the board refused to yield quietly. That afternoon, as Ethan tended to the trees, a sharp knock startled him. At the door stood the HOA president, flanked by two stern men in suits. "We're here to discuss your actions," the president said coldly. "You're violating multiple regulations with these trees. You must remove them immediately." Ethan held his ground. "I'm protecting my property. The trees aren't going anywhere." The president's eyes flickered with something dark. "You're making a mistake. This isn't just about trees anymore." Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet rumbled. The saplings swayed violently, leaves shimmering with that strange light, as if responding to Ethan's defiance. The men took a step back, unease flickering in their eyes. Before Ethan could say more, a low growl echoed from the tree line. It wasn't an animal, but something else. Something primal. The branches bent and twisted, thickening into massive limbs that creaked and groaned like ancient giants awakening from slumber. From behind the green wall, a figure emerged. A towering humanoid form woven from bark, leaves, and vines. Its eyes glowed with the same eerie light as the trees. The HOA men paled. The president stammered, "What? What is that?" Ethan took a step forward, heart pounding but steady. "This is nature's judgment. You tried to control us, silence us, and destroy what was ours. Now you'll face the consequences." The tree guardian lifted a massive arm, pointing at the HOA men. Without violence but with undeniable force, it pushed them back, clearing the way. News of the guardian spread fast. Neighbors gathered, witnessing the silent power of the trees, the living wall that protected their homes and their freedom. Faced with overwhelming public support and the impossible presence of the guardian, the HOA crumbled. The corrupt board resigned, local authorities launched investigations, and a new, fairer council was elected. Ethan's view was never fully restored, but the green wall he had planted became a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the unyielding spirit of a community reclaimed. Months later, Ethan stood before the towering trees, their branches rustling softly in the breeze, whispering thanks in a language only he could almost understand. Then came a letter, this time from the new HOA council. To Ethan, the brave neighbor who stood, tall against darkness, your trees have not only shielded your view but awakened our hearts. Let this be a new beginning. Ethan smiled, the weight of years of struggle lifting. But in the quiet of the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the trees shimmered again, alive, watchful, and ready for whatever came next. For the green wall wasn't just a barrier, it was a living testament, a warning, and a promise.